All right, Psalm 54, let's call this one Cleanse Me of Suspect Family, in this situation in which David is actually going to be sold out by family members trying to gain a little bit of clout at his expense. Beginning with a prayer in verse 1. This is one of 3 Psalms, or it's the first of our last 3 Psalms, all of which are going to seem to start out with a prayer and possibly take the shape of a prayer. But in verse 1 here, "O God, save me by your name and vindicate me by your might. O God, hear my prayer. Give ear to the words of my mouth. For strangers have risen against me. Ruthless men seek my life. They do not set God before themselves." And that word strangers in verse 3 has a footnote that reads, some manuscripts actually call insolent men, which is super consistent with the introduction or the title to this chapter, which says it's a psalm that David wrote when the Ziphites sold him out to Saul. And in looking up the Ziphites, I discovered that some scholars say that the Ziphites were actually from the tribe of Judah, who were basically David's relatives, his own people, who, as we mentioned, sold David out for a little bit of clout with King Saul, which is going to provoke the what from God. Round about verse 5, David is going to say, "He will return the evil to my enemies. In your faithfulness, put an end to them," which seems kind of harsh until you recall that they were selling David out to a man that was trying to kill him, which all leads to the how. In this case, how David will respond to God once again delivering him from his enemies, where in verses 6 and 7, he's going to say he is going to make a free will offering. For in verse 7, he has delivered me from every trouble, and my eye has looked in triumph on my enemies. The thing that might have stood out to me in this chapter more than any other, as we've occasionally mentioned before, is the way in which our peace of mind may be linked to and helped by our ability to reframe an issue beyond that which the enemy would have us fixate on. And no matter how real, substantial, or actually intimidating our problems might be, to the degree we are tempted to fixate on those problems, we lose track of exactly what David is doing here, understanding that he is talking about the fact that he will sacrifice to God and he will rejoice, because it doesn't sound like his enemy is done with him. But David is able to maximize his peace in this situation. Once again, the peace that surpasses understanding, because he is able to, as we saw in the praise psalms, praise God even when it's going bad, because he recalls the way that God has come through for him in the past, which provides the foundation for what he is asking God to help him with now. In this case, the fact that God has delivered him from every trouble and allowed him to look in triumph over his enemies in the past is providing the foundation for the peace of mind he has now, even though the trouble ain't over. And so my prayer for you is my prayer for me, that God give us the vision to reframe the issue beyond the problems that the enemy has set before us, so that we can not only have hope, but confidence no matter how bad things seem. And not just the kind of confidence that we can manufacture, but the kind of legitimate confidence that comes from God, which is why we often say it's so important to maintain your integrity, because the only true confidence comes from God, which is why we used to say, even though we don't say it as much, God's best to you as you go forward in him.